I've done a number of videos on 10mm pistols, including the Kimber Camp Guard 10mm that I own, and also the Glock 40 that I own. I've done videos on a number of borrowed 10mm also, and there's one coming up very shortly on the Smith & Wesson Performance Center 10mm. When I do those videos, it seems that I'm getting comments that the 10mm is just basically watered down to where it's no better than a 40. And I've seen a number of other videos by other content creators where they will compare a 10mm versus a 40, but usually they're using guns designed specifically for those, and there are minor differences. The difference between a Glock 20 in 10mm and a Glock 22 in 40 caliber is about 1/8 of an inch difference in the barrel length. Not a big deal, right? But again, I guess I'm maybe a little more anal than that. I want to make sure that I eliminate as many variables as possible. So I did a comparison with 10mm versus 40 caliber, which is still 10mm short, and you can see that there is about 1/8 of an inch difference between the two. I did it out of the Glock 40 for both the 10 and the 40. Now, I don't recommend doing this. While it does work, there are a number of reasons why you shouldn't be shooting a 40 caliber round out of a 10mm pistol. We won't get into all that. I know you can shoot 38 out of 357, but that's a whole different ballgame. So again, if you're interested in why that you shouldn't be shooting 40 out of a 10, maybe we can explain that sometime, but I'm sure you can do the research on it. So it's not something that you should do other than what I did for an experiment today. All right, some basics here. You can see this is the 6.2 inch barrel out of the Glock 40. This is a 10mm barrel, and when I drop a 10mm round in, you can hear it plunk when it hits the end. That's when the end of the cartridge case hits the end of the chamber. So this is head spacing off the end of the cartridge case like it's supposed to. Take the shorter 40 caliber round, you drop it in, and you can see it goes all the way in. So that when the rim hits the end of the case, there's really nothing sticking out. So it's 1/8 of an inch difference, and that means that the firing pin is not going to hit the cartridge case. However, when you actually chamber the 40 caliber round in a 10mm pistol, in fact in anything, the round will slide up under the extractor, which is how it's supposed to work, and the extractor will actually hold that round. So therefore the firing pin will hit the primer on the 40, except the 40 won't be fully seated, although it'll be fully supported just as much as the 10mm is. It's not going to be fully seated. There's going to be that extra 1/8 of an inch gap between the end of the cartridge case and the end of the chamber, and that can cause problems if you do that enough, but as an experiment we're doing it simply. So to keep the test as simple as possible, I just used Federal, plain old generic Federal 40 Smith & Wesson 180 grain full metal jacket versus Federal American Eagle 10mm 180 grain full metal jacket type projectiles. And I also did the 40 caliber HydraShok 180 grain, which is also Federal, and Federal 10mm HydraShok 180 grain. So trying to compare apples to apples as much as possible. I did not get into anything like the high performance stuff like Buffalo Bore, Underwood Extreme. I don't have the comparable ammunition for the 40, so we just left it real simple, comparing two basic types of ammunition for the 10 and the 40. I did speed up the chronograph work so that we won't have an endless video here, so let's get into it. Glock 40 Federal 180 grain, just plain old 10mm ammunition. And let's just see what the chronograph says. 141, 123, 123, 121, 123, and 116. Average 1127. Extreme spread 2558. Standard deviation 9.05. Let's try 6 rounds 180 grain Federal HydraShok and see what these will do. 1065. Slow the middle, right? 1038. 1038 again. 1046. 1067. And 1056.
An average of 1052. Stream spread 2911. Standard deviation 1292. Let's see if 40s will work out of this. 180 grain 40 caliber ammunition, which is just 10 millimeters short, and these will not headspace off the case mouth. So let's see if the extractor will hold them well enough to shoot out of this Glock 40.
40 caliber grain Federal. 1046. 1039. 1029. 1045. 1029 again. And finally, 1038.
Average of 1038. Stream spread 1120. 1728. Standard deviation of 7.41.
And finally, let's try some 40 caliber HydraShoks. 40 caliber HydraShoks out of the Glock 40. Again, we're head spacing, or actually not head spacing. The extractor is holding them in there. So far, so good. 970.7. 965.0. 91.5. No, you're checking. From taker. 978. 966.8. And 975.7.
Average of 966.3. Stream spread of 4351. 1486 for standard deviation. So the conclusion is the 180 grain Federal American Eagle generic type ammunition is running about 18% faster, or 18% more energy rather, than the 40 caliber of the same weight out of the same barrel. For the HydraShok, the 10 millimeters running about 18.5% more energy than the 40 caliber HydraShok. What I found interesting, though, is that the HydraShoks are actually going a little bit slower than the generic ammunition. So when you look at the 10 millimeter HydraShok, is only about 2.5% more energy than the 40 caliber plain old generic American Eagle ammunition. So I don't know, is it worthwhile to carry the HydraShok? Yeah, okay, you got expansion and all that. So that is the conclusion. Again, if you're at all interested in the 10 versus the 40, and again, this is not a full scientific test. It doesn't look at all the fancy other ammunition available. I used what I had on hand, but try to keep it generic. And one final reminder, don't do this at home, shooting 40 caliber ammunition out of your 10 millimeter. Yeah, it's cheaper, you can practice with it, but it does create lots of problems, which we, again, are not going to get into. Thanks for staying with me while we just look at this quick, totally unscientific experiment.